All right.
Cheers, my
Cheers.
All right, Sam, what is this? The Couchpact. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Couchpact, a Stormlight Archive podcast where we go through and reread every chapter of the books. Joining me again today is my friend Sam,
How's it going?
and we're picking up where we left off in episode 1 with chapter 3, aren't we?
Yeah. Just for everyone watching, if for some reason you didn't go watch episode 1, which you should, because this is a series to read in order, we are going to be spoiling everything in these books because we're rereading it. So if you haven't read it, go read them and then come back and join us.
There's also going to be some light spoilers for other Cosmere-related things that get touched on, if they get touched on. So be prepared for that. If you don't want that spoiled for you, go read the entire body of Brandon Sanderson's published works first. All right, the City of Bells.
Yeah. So you just want to get right into it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So last chapter we left off on was chapter 2. So we're going into chapter 3 now. We left Kaladin in his slave cage.
Kaladin was left.
Yeah. So from there we go right into a new character. Yeah. Shallan. So just a quick summary of the chapter first. We get introduced to Shallan. She arrives in Kharbranth after a voyage. And the intro to this chapter alludes to a plan that she has.
Yes.
That's all we know about it so far. It just says that she has a plan. And it has to do with Yasna Kholin, who isn't really mentioned beyond. Yes.
No, we don't really know anything about Yasna or the Kholins yet.
Yeah.
This is kind of the first introduction to them.
So, do you have anything you want to start with the chapter?
Yeah, let's talk about world building again.
Yeah.
Because this is a massive world building chapter.
And we discussed this a little bit before we started recording, where there's one in this chunk. There's one really, really good chapter, and the rest is on first read. It was pretty amazing because there's some really good world building going on. But on a reread, you kind of know what's coming with the Bridge 4 chapter, and you're like, okay, let's get to Bridge 4. Let's get to Bridge 4.
Yeah, so like this first Shallan chapter, it's important, it's needed. We love it. The first time I read the book, I was, entirely invested. Going back for the reread, it's a lot of like, I know this. It's just making, it's talking about Kharbranth, the greater world outside of wherever Kaladin was, because that's the only experience we have with the world right now is Kaladin fighting in Amaram's army through Sen's eyes.
Yeah.
So then this is kind of like different. She's on a boat. She's going to Kharbranth, which is notably a city-state. It is just the city. That's all it is.
Yep.
And it's also notably open. It doesn't care about rank or ethnicity, so the ports are open to anybody who comes through, and people stop there very often because of that.
Right. So Sanderson kind of has some room to play around with. Like, there's some descriptions of like the different types of people that are hanging out in the port at Kharbranth that Shallan arrives in.
Mm-hmm.
I actually really like the way this chapter started with her. It's her talking to Tozbek on the boat.
Captain of the boat, right?
Yeah. And is he the captain?
Yeah, he's the captain.
Okay. So her just talking to Tozbek kind of like you immediately get the idea of their relationship.
Mm-hmm. And how Shallan is.
Right. It's just a really good intro to Shallan because she's very like it encompasses her character throughout the series really well, and obviously she grows from this, but this is kind of the core of her character. It's like you can see it in this conversation with Tozbek.
Right, is like timid but like almost bursting to let her personality show.
Right.
It's just been kind of like kept down for so long.
Yeah. On the topic of world building too, another thing that this chapter did really well that I thought, Everything we've heard up through this point, besides the prologue and the whole 10,000 years in the past, basically.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
All of that stuff. This is the first time we're getting the story told from the perspective of a Light Eyes.
Okay.
We've heard Kaladin talks about Light Eyes a bit in his chapter, and Sen talks about them a little bit too, I believe.
I know in that one
chapter
they
too.
at least like note the one that's riding around on a horse,
Right.
and Kaladin's mad.
But it just further reinforces the caste system, basically, that they have in place here with the Light Eyes and the Dark Eyes. And we're getting it from the upper class perspective now,
Right.
in Shallan, and how different her life is just culturally from Kaladin's,
Right. Like how
because she's a Light Eyes.
It's emphasized in how Yalb treats her. The carriage ride throughout the city. The guy wanting to he's speaking with Yalb in a different language and tries to like get a deal with Yalb to coerce her out of some extra marks, which I have the chips, the marks, and the bromes written down as another piece of world building that's just kind of fluttered in this chapter. Is you learn how the currency works in this one.
Yep.
With the gemstones, you learn stuff about the gemstones being infused, the done gemstones, and the concept of like money lenders having to come to like confirm the authenticity of gemstones if they're done, stuff like that.
Yeah. It's more set up for the magic system.
It is more set up for the magic system, and they hint at that by going emerald, which is the most like the most precious gem because it can be used by soulcasters to turn something into grain, stone into grain.
That's the other thing I had written down in my notes was this is I believe it's the first mention of soul casting. I don't think they talk about it really in the first couple chapters. I don't think they mention it.
Yeah, I feel like if they mentioned it in the Kalak Jezrien chapter, we would have talked about it.
Yeah.
So it's probably not mentioned there.
So they mentioned that this, like I said, is the first mention of soul casting, which is like a transmutation magic sort of, which is kind of like it's one of the magic systems that is introduced in the series.
Yeah.
Not the first, because we got the lashings already with this chapter.
Right, and right now, soul casting seems kind of like a technological magic, right? There's a device that you use.
There's a science to it.
There's a science. There's things that equal things, and the ardents of the faith, and Yasna, who is a notable heretic.
Yeah,
or people who have soul casters.
I don't think she's a heretic because she has a soul caster.
No, it's just
she just
like
is
the
a heretic.
People who have soul casters are ardents of the Vorin religion.
Yep.
And Yazda, a notable heretic of the Vorin religion. Really quickly, we have another high storm mentioned. Without too much going into high storms, we just know that they exist. And they leave behind something called Crem, which is probably used to build the city of Kharbranth. It's made out of like some stone or something. And
I think they describe Kharbranth as being like carved out of the stone, though.
Yeah. But just High Storms and Crem is another piece of incredible world building. Yeah. That's like, wow, that's odd. And then it just becomes this super integral part to like the feel of Roshar.
I think it's in this chapter too. It might be in the later Shallan chapter, but at some point while we're with Shallan, we learn that Kharbranth is a special city because of the location it's constructed in, and it's shielded from high storms naturally.
That's part of the that's the story that the carriage driver's telling her. Is that it's carved out of the mountain. I think it's one of the most like naturally protected cities in Roshar from high storms.
So I didn't really. Did you have anything else in this chapter?
Parshmen are mentioned.
Yep.
I don't know how much Parshmen have been mentioned before this. I don't think a whole lot.
They talk about them in the Zeth chapter.
Okay.
And how they're usually how they're different from the Parshmen that they're familiar with.
Okay,
Or
so
that, yeah.
Zeth talks about the Parshendi in
Yeah.
comparison to the Parshmen.
Yeah.
So then here, Shallan talks about regular Parshmen, and actually in comparison to human slaves, because her father liked Parshman slaves a lot better. And we get some more descriptories towards them being very docile and slow-minded, but very good workers. Other than that, she is established as an artist.
Yep, she talks about her.
She draws
sketches,
a sky
yeah.
eel as soon as she gets into the port. She also, one of the things that took me a little bit longer on the first read to pick up on than I would like to admit is the fact that she has a photographic memory.
Yeah, that's kind of a big thing.
Because, like, you never call it a photographic memory, but she takes a moment to, like, imprint the image in her mind.
I think she literally says she takes a memory.
She takes a memory. Yeah, that's a good, yeah, that took me a second. And I'm like, oh, like, that's a real thing in the real world. It's a photographic memory. She just has that. That's why she's such a good artist.
So I guess moving on to chapter 4. But yeah, chapter 3 is on first read. It's amazing because you get introduced to a new character. And it's not one thing these books do a lot that especially this one, is they tend to switch which character they're following at the exact time you don't want them to.
Right.
This one, it was a little like, okay, well, we kind of, I think on first read, I was like, no, I want to get back to Cal. What's going on with Kaladin? Like, what happened to him? And this time I'm like, we know it's coming. We know he's in the caravan for a while. So I was kind of glad to like go back to, I was glad to like hear about Shallan for the first time again in this. Cause
I would say book 1 especially is like taking back to Kaladin.
Yeah.
And then after book 1, it's kind of like, okay, everyone's pretty fucking important. Like, let's follow everyone and see what's going on. But book 1 is very take me back to Kaladin. But in the middle of those, like, you know, you get pulled into a Shallan chapter and you're like, okay, take me back to Kaladin. 10 minutes into the Shallan chapter, you're enthralled. Yeah. You're listening to what's going on.
The Shallan chapters are, there's a huge difference in the tones of these chapters. Like, the Kaladin chapters are like, they feel like a war story because it is. And that's the tone it takes. And the Shallan chapters are almost like a heist movie.
Almost.
Is kind of the vibe I get.
Which is crazy, though. And not to talk about it too much, but I would say Shallan at the end of the book is way better than Kaladin. The last chapter you see with Kaladin in this book and the last chapter you get with Shallan, Shallan is the big gut punch chapter.
Yeah.
Even though Kaladin's been the gripping story up until the end of the book, Shallan's the one that's like the almost like a close the book plot twist kind of thing.
Right.
Something like that. Which
leads well into the second book.
Very well.
Because the second book, I feel like Shallan kind of takes center stage in that one.
Yes.
A lot.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great point. The end of the first book takes you out of that bring me back to Kaladin because it makes you realize that Shallan is more integral to things than you might have thought up until that point.
Right. She's like integral to the overarching story of all of the books we have so far.
Right.
Kaladin is too, but at this point his backstory isn't as important to the history of what's going on.
Even his like reach in the event isn't as great as Shallan's. Right. Shallan, that's end of the book stuff, but like Shallan's good.
Yeah,
is main point. I want to, before moving on to Kaladin, the two main points to take away from Shallan's chapter is Daddy Devar is dead.
Yep.
And Yasna is integral to Shallan and her brother's plans to save her house from financial ruin. That's chapter 3.
Yep.
Chapter 4.
Yeah.
The Shattered Plains.
Actually, this isn't even when we get to the Shattered Plains.
It's the name of the chapter.
Oh, it's called the Shattered Plains?
Yeah, I have the chapter names.
Right. Oh, yeah, because I think they get there
at the end.
At the end of the chapter, right? But this, I did not have a lot of notes in this chapter because I think the big thing that we go back to Cal, and he kind of just has like a little bit of revenge that he gets to take He has like a tiny glimmer of like, okay, he's still got some fight in him.
Yeah,
Where-
so we get back to Cal. The Windspren is there.
Yep.
He has started to not be bothered by her presence because she stopped annoying him as much, stopped playing as many pranks on him. And then leading into what you say, well, one thing I want to talk about first is at the very beginning of the chapter, the Windspren goes, why do men cry? After asking Kaladin, like, why weren't you crying? And he's like, what do you mean? And she's like, all the other men cry in the cage at night. And he's like, he has a response, and then she's like, why do men cry? Which is a very philosophical question for an entity that has been given the intelligence of about a 7-year-old so far.
Yeah.
So I love that out of the first paragraph from chapter 4. And then what does Kaladin do?
Yeah,
What's his revenge?
So basically Tvlakov is trying to he's clearly lost. And he has a map, and I don't remember if, because I read this a while ago, but I don't remember if he approaches Kaladin and asks if he was familiar with the area, knew how to read the map. But Kaladin basically kind of coerces him into being like, okay, look, yeah, I can figure out where we are. Give me the map. And
let me see the map.
Let me see the map. And Tvlakov hands Kaladin the map, and he just rips it up immediately.
Shreds it.
He just shreds it in front of him, and it was very satisfying.
He shreds it in front of him, and then it walks to the other corner of the cell and sits down like an insolent child.
Yeah.
Is insolent the right
Indolent?
word? Indolent child. And then you get the bit of the two guards with Tvlakov being like, I'm not touching him. Like, Tvlakov's like, and the guards are like,
Yeah. Because we spent the whole, like, the last Kaladin chapter, like, he had the, I don't remember, the poison leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, it's like, is he, like, he's contemplating suicide or something? And you're like, oh, man, like, he's just lost his fight. But
there's definitely a part of contemplating suicide, but at the end of that chapter, we know that he was going to poison Tvlakov.
right, like,
We know about the tea and the...
he says he wasn't sure what he was going to do with them.
And then that chapter ends with him realizing that he dropped them, and he failed even in that.
Yeah, so it's nice to kind of come back and, like, he still has a little bit of fight in him, enough to, even if it's just spite of Tvlakov, but I liked that part. That was fun.
Yeah, I have, we realized that Kaladin is 19.
Yep. Which is...
My poor boy.
He's been through a lot. But yeah, we also get to experience our first high storm in this chapter. They basically take the cart that they're keeping the slaves in, and they have these big shutters that kind of come down on the sides.
Right, this is the first high storm we experience.
Yeah.
They've been mentioned a few times, but this is the one we lived through.
Right.
And Kaladin teaches us a little bit about high storms, most notably the storm wall.
Yep.
And how dangerous it is. He, as a soldier, doesn't care much for the tales of things that wander in the high storms, or even the Storm Father himself. The most dangerous thing about them is the massive wall of water and debris that is shooting at you at miles per hour.
Yeah. So they just have, like, regular hurricanes here, basically.
It's also mentioned with the map. What is said about that? It's like a little bit of high storm mythology. The map has storm warden calculations on them that it can be mathematically predicted. His father was a hobbyist in the subject. His father could predict a high storm 8 out of 10 times, it was said.
They keep dropping in, like, little bits about Kaladin's dad in these first few chapters.
Also, we know in that whole exchange with the map and Kaladin talking to Tvlakov, which I very much enjoy that back and forth right here, because I want to talk about this, but at the very end of the chapter, Kaladin's like, he swears in Brandon Sanderson fashion, in-universe swears, and Syl's like, what? And he's like, I'm almost starting to like him, Tvlakov.
Yeah.
Just because, like, he's a slaver, but at least, like, he's true to his character. He knows who he is.
Yeah.
But we know that Kaladin was in Amaram's army, and we know that Amaram sold Kaladin into slavery. And we know that Kaladin wants to kill Amaram.
Yeah.
Those are the things that we learn from this chapter. We don't know why that happened, but we know that it happened.
And then towards the end of the chapter, they arrive at the Shattered Plains, which Kaladin mentions in Sen's chapter. Is he's trying to get his unit to the Shattered Plains to fight there.
Fight for a real army.
Right. And Kaladin has finally made it to the Shattered Plains.
Yeah, a little begrudgingly.
Yeah.
He finds it a bit ironic. Kaladin briefly mentions seeing other Windspren and telling his Windspren to go play with them. She comes back and mentions to him, as they're getting to the Shattered Plains, she's like, there's more of you up there. And he's like, slaves? And she goes, I don't know, people. That's how she responds to that question. They notice a little tie-in, because the only thing that we know about the Kholin house right now is Yasna Kholin. When they get there, they see the Kholin banners, and they note that as the king's house. Someone in the cage with Kaladin says that it's good that they're going to the Shattered Plains if they end up in the king's army. He talks about Dalinar and how honorable Dalinar is, and apparently he's never broken his word in his life. Yeah. And Kaladin's sitting in the corner like, they said that shit about Amaram.
Yeah.
So he's a bit salty. But
he's
we
definitely
do hear about Dalinar Kholin and his honor.
Yeah.
In this chapter,
it's clear at this point that Kaladin is completely like disillusioned to Light Eyes being honorable in any sense. Like he's like, they're all terrible.
We also no context, but a little mention of Tien.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
it. Just a name. Tien's mentioned. That's all we get.
Yeah. They do mention that brought me back to the Sen's chapter. When Kaladin's sergeant, or I don't remember if Kaladin's he has a sergeant in the squad because he's the leader.
Yeah.
His sergeant talks about how Kaladin always gets like the younger recruits into his unit, and he's like, I don't know, it seems like they remind him of someone. So we get little hints of Tien's story here and there as we're going.
And
just
goddamn,
sprinkled in.
Kaladin longs to hold a spear. What he wouldn't give to hold a spear again.
He wants to fight. He wants to stab.
Also, another little interesting bit of world building is that in the Alethi law, slaves are legally required to have a slave debt that they are legally required to get paid during their slavery, and they can choose to either put that money towards, as they so kindly put it, wenches and drink, or
paying for their
paying off their freedom, which is nice. That's cute. It says it could take anywhere from 10 to 50 years to do that, but it's nice.
It's a nice concept, I guess, if you're gonna have slavery.
And that would take us to the end of chapter 4.
Yeah. So on to chapter 5.
Heretic.
Yeah. I love this chapter. This chapter has one of my favorite moments in it, in what we've read so far. But
I don't have a lot of notes for this chapter, but I also am very fond of this chapter.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's a lot. It's very cool. I just don't think that there's a lot connecting it to the greater picture of the book, aside from, hey, do you want to meet Yasna and learn that she's a fucking badass?
See, I kind of disagree.
Okay.
Because I think there's one scene in this chapter that sets the tone for how some of the characters approach magic in this series, and specifically one of my favorite characters. But
let's talk about it.
We'll get to that. First up, little summary of what happens. Shallan meets Yasna and Taravangian. Thanks just to him as well.
The king of Kharbranth.
The king of Kharbranth, and she doesn't realize that he's the king at first. He's like this old man.
Yeah. He's an old homely man.
Yeah. And she kind of pieces it together. She's like, "Oh, I should probably bow."
Yeah.
Which is fun. And then Shallan gets to witness Yasna soul casting. And Yasna rejects her as her ward, which her plan quickly falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
So, because that was the first part of her plan, is to become Yasna's ward,
Mm-hmm.
and immediately just fails at that. We also get the reveal of Shallan's plan, which we can talk about. But so back to the kind of the beginning of this chapter, she finds Yasna and Taravangian, and Taravangian is asking Yasna for help with something, and Shallan follows them and figures out that Taravangian's is it his granddaughter
I think granddaughter, some
Yeah.
relative
is
relation.
is trapped because a boulder fell in one of the corridors, and he knows that Yasna can get her out because she can soul cast. But so this is my favorite part.
Okay.
Is Yasna asks Shallan how she would go about calculating the weight of the boulder, as like kind of it's construed as like a test for her like wardship, and Shallan just says, I would ask the like scribes, they've probably already calculated it.
Mm-hmm.
And Yasna's like, good answer, don't rediscover information that we already know, which I think sets up later that's like a very engineering. I'm an engineer, and that's just do whatever the most efficient thing is. Just do it. Like you don't need
the don't reinvent the wheel.
don't reinvent the wheel. Just sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. And Shallan's like, well, we should just ask because someone probably already calculated it.
Right.
And Yas is like, that's correct. And this sets up that because later we're introduced to Navani,
Mm-hmm.
Yasna's mom,
Mm-hmm.
and she is basically she's like my favorite character in the series because she's just an engineer. And she like that's probably but there's two things that are my favorite part about the series. One is how much like mental health plays into all these characters and the things they experience and
how grounded their fantasy struggle is.
Right. The other thing that I love is how Brandon Sanderson sets up these systems and then has characters exploit them in ways that make total logical sense, and they seem like really ingenious, and like if you were just reading you could have thought of these things.
Mm-hmm. Because like the systems are so
right
well,
and it just sets up that kind of like, oh, there are definitely engineers in this world.
Yeah.
Because and I don't know, I just love that scene where Shallan is like, let's just ask about I'm sure someone already calculated it.
Right, because it also establishes this like fucking the boulder fell. They're going to get the king and Yasna to free them, which means that calculating like this is such an advanced society that the calculation of the boulder was so easy. Someone did it while they were fucking around trying to find the king and Yasna.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like oh my god, we need to figure out the calculation of this boulder to save them. It was just we know maths. We can estimate the weight of this boulder, and it's such an easy thing to do because our society has progressed enough and is knowledgeable enough in the maths and sciences of the natural world to do that quickly.
Yeah. And then we find out the reason that she needs to know the mass is because when she soul casts it, she can't convert it to a lesser form of matter. So we have conservation of matter basically in this magic system, which is kind of funny to me because it's like something that I feel like is not usually thought of. And she she soul casts it into smoke, and it fills the corridor with smoke, and it's the exact same like basically mass of smoke as the boulder was, and it's like such a simple like. I don't know, like it's a cool it's transmutation, but they're doing it like transmutation is a very like common magic form, but I feel like it's really well thought out in this and explained well. And
another one of those is just really quickly jumping into Mistborn is one of the greatest things that is talked about in that is not said this way, but every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That's a very scientific saying. Who said that? That's like Newton's third law or something, right?
Yeah.
They hammer that in the first couple chapters of Mistborn because it's so important to something that's going on, and it is just a natural law of physics. but it is so integral to the magic system because it is a natural law of physics.
Right. And that's why I feel like we talked about this in the last episode a bit, where we're like, is this high fantasy? Because like there is a very like there's very powerful magic in it, but it feels so grounded because it's so well explained that it almost doesn't feel like high fantasy.
Right. And then someone like summons a 6-foot-long sword out of the mist,
and you're like, okay,
I
forgot.
It is high fantasy.
This is high fantasy. I love this chapter specifically because of that scene, and we got introduced to Yasna, which is
phenomenal.
One of the best characters. Yeah, I feel like I say it about all.
I mean, but... so actually, let's talk about Yasna for a second because she is a phenomenal character, and I doubt anyone who's read the series doesn't think that.
Mm-hmm.
However, from Shallan's point of view, as someone who has been taught just by the way books work to sympathize with Shallan because she is our storyteller in this chapter, Yasna is a bitch.
Yeah.
Like ruthless bitch as she tests Shallan in her knowledge of the womanly arts.
Yep, and then she just rejects her immediately.
And the one thing that Shallan is so confident and good at drawing, Yasna just dismisses as unimportant instantly. Which is really funny for later, but I do love that because Yasna is a great character, but by God, she has a rough first impression.
Yep.
We get to see soul casting. We get to learn a little bit about how soul casting works.
That's the important bit to take away.
Shallan sees Yasna's soul caster,
and that is where it reveals her plan to steal the soul caster.
It's also revealed that her dad had one.
Yeah,
that whole bit is revealed is that her dad had one. They found it on his body. It was broken, and the reason that they need Yasna's is to replace their father's broken one. Right. I don't think we know why they.
We learned about that a little later,
but they want to replace their their dead father's broken soulcaster, with the heretic princess, heretic princess's working soulcaster. And then chapter 5 ends.
Yeah. Chapter 6. We're flying through these this time.
4.
Yeah. This is one of the best chapters in the book. This is where I was reading my first read through. This is where I got addicted and I just couldn't stop reading.
Counter opinion to that.
Counter opinion.
I love Bridge 4. I love where Kaladin's story goes at the end of this book. Bridge 4 was kind of grueling to get through in the first book.
Oh, yeah.
Everything about it just makes me, Kaladin. Brandon, give Kaladin an easier time, please. Because this just hurts.
Yeah.
And looking back on it, obviously it's needed and it's great, but getting through it was painful because Kaladin's 19.
Yeah.
I'm 23. I couldn't do what you could double my life, and I still couldn't do what Kaladin does in the first half of this book.
So my before we go any further, my summary for this chapter, I just wrote down Bridge 4 Hell, because that's
funny. I have at the very end of this, Bridge 4 is Kaladin's personal hell.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they say something like that in this chapter.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I'd read a bit of fantasy before this, but I'd never been super into. I read. I don't know. When I was in high school and stuff, I'd read fantasy.
Yeah, but YA fantasy.
Yeah, middle school, high school. But I was not expecting this. I didn't really know a ton about the series going in. So going immediately into this was pretty shocking. It's very graphic and it's
very cruel.
Yeah. So Kaladin gets sold by Tvlakov at the camp.
Wait. You're going too far ahead of my notes. Let me start.
Okay, you start.
Because we get some context as to why there's fighting on the Shattered Plains. Mm-hmm. And surprise, surprise, it's because Gavlar died in the fucking prologue.
Yeah.
So the consequences of that have caught up. The entire reason the Shattered Plains fighting is a thing is because of Zeth, Sun Vallano, and his assassination of King Gavilar in last episode.
And then the Parshundi taking responsibility for the assassination openly.
Yeah, openly being like, "Yo, that was us."
Yeah,
dog. Rest in peace, Pop Smoke. Sorry, I just wanted to put that in the beginning. There you go. Let's hear about Bridge 4.
Yeah, so Kaladin gets sold into this bridge crew, and he hears bridge crews, and he's like, "Oh, that we're gonna be building bridges, cool."
Well, okay, I'm gonna slow down a little bit again. Sorry, because at the very beginning, everyone's excited about being in the Shattered Plains. Working for the army seems like a good thing.
Yeah,
they're like, "Oh, we're gonna be cleaning latrines and chopping wood for the army. It's gonna be great." We end up in Dalinar's army, and I hear some of his slaves are treated better than blah, blah, like really good stuff. They have high expectations. They end up in Sadeas's war camp.
Yep.
Kaladin quickly notes that Sadeas was the High Lord ultimately in charge of where he grew up, which is briefly mentioned to be a town called Hearthstone. And everyone's really excited to be sent to the logging camps. That's where they think they're going at first, is the logging camps. And then
we do get when Kaladin's being sold, we get some good edgy Kaladin lines. The light-eyed woman who's buying them says she sees Kaladin's Shash brand, and says, "Where I come from, slaves who deserve those are simply executed." And Kaladin goes, "They are fortunate."
The lucky ones.
I was like, "Oh, that's a little much." When I reread that, I was like, "All right."
And then you read the rest of this chapter.
Yeah. And they really are fortunate.
Yeah.
It seems. Also, do we know who the woman who bought the slaves is? It says she seemed like a very important.
Why, you want to say that she's probably Ela?
I doubt it.
I had the same thought rereading it.
I don't remember if that was what I was like. Is that Ela?
I almost want to say no, because if it was, it would have been rebrought. Like, important characters being in the story before we meet them as important characters is always rebrought up.
Yeah.
To be like, look at how smart I was, because Brandon Sanderson is very smart. And he wants you to know that. He wants to point and be like, look at that, you missed that the first time, didn't you?
I'm just trying to remember if they do bring it up again.
I almost want to say it's totally not Ela, because then
this seems way beneath what Ela should be doing.
That, and like later on when Gaz gets replaced by the thing, and then like that guy's wife is kind of the leader. Why would a random High Prince's wife have been elevated to the position above Gaz if Ela was involved? You know what I mean? I don't think it's Ela.
Okay.
I had the same thought. I just don't think so. Because he does mention it's like, oh, important, and we know we're in Sadeas's camp. I just think we're looking a little too hard.
Yeah. Then so moving on, they go to the bridge crew. They get to like the place where they have the lumber yard, and they have the bridges being built there, and all the barracks for the bridge crews.
I would like to quickly note, not everyone gets assigned to the bridge crews right away.
No.
In fact, Gaz points at Gaz, like,
we're introduced to Gaz too.
We're introduced to Gaz as Tavlakov. Okay, I'm sorry. No, it's Tavlakov and the woman buying the slaves.
Yes.
Tavlakov, quote unquote, betrays Kaladin, gets a little bit of due comeuppance for the map incident, and tells,
because he tries to convince he's like, I was a soldier.
He wants to fight,
and he goes, "Why?" Or the woman who's buying him goes, "Well, why were you made a slave?" And he goes, I killed a man.
And why is your branding so bad?
Right.
Why do you have such an intense brand?
And then Tavlakov pipes up and is like, "Oh no, he's a deserter. You don't want him to fight."
Yeah, he's a deserter and a rabble rouser.
Yeah,
he'll get all the other ones going.
Yeah,
he's like a
he
chihuahua.
caused the other ones to desert too.
So Kaladin gets real pissed off, thinks about just choking Gaz out then and there, and then gets thwopped on the back of the head by a soldier.
Yep.
And because of that, it's either Tavlakov to the woman or the woman to Gaz says, give this one special
It's
treatment.
the woman to Gaz.
Woman to
Yeah.
Gaz, give this one special treatment. And Gaz goes, special treatment? You're in bridge 4. Everyone else wait here.
Yep.
So everyone else gets a nice break during the bridge run that immediately starts, and Kaladin gets sent to the Cursed Bridge.
Yeah, so Gaz is an interesting character that we get introduced to. The first thing that I had written down about Gaz is
I'll tell you mine after.
so do we learn Syl's name yet at this point?
No, we haven't. It says it. He asks, do you have a name spirit?
Yeah,
in the next
that's later. Anyway, so
it's actually in this chapter. It's a couple more lines in my notes.
Gaz has an eye patch, and there's a scene where Syl like comes up behind him and is like closing an eye and like making fun of him. And my
Yeah.
first thought was like, is Syl being ableist? Is this okay? I don't know about this, Syl. Like Gaz is an asshole, but like that's not great.
No,
Syl.
it's okay. You're allowed to be ist if the person has given up their decency.
Okay.
That's my line. If you don't like them, you can be any version of ist to them.
Yeah, but I think Syl might be ableist. Is my point from that.
Syl can fly. She's definitely ableist. The Windspren, not
Yeah.
Syl. Who's Syl?
All right, the Windspren. Sorry.
No, we know who Syl is.
We know who
This
Syl
is a
is.
reread. My first line that I have for Gaz is an unhappy and unlikable man.
That sums it up pretty well. Where were we?
And then bridge running is described, and it, in all caps, sucks.
Yeah.
And then Cal is also annoyed or jealous. Cal's a little jealous when he sees Syl messing with Gaz.
I think the thing I kept thinking about in this chapter, I don't know how Sanderson was able to take, like, I don't know, the worst thing that I think a human can, like, one of the worst things I think a human can experience is, like, trench warfare.
Okay.
Like, I don't know if you've seen All Quiet on the Western Front. I watched it a while ago, but
Nope.
It's about German soldiers during World War One.
Okay.
And it's a horrifying movie. And it reminds me a
okay.
lot of this chapter because we later learn how stupid the things that they're like running these bridge crews for is. They're literally just trying to get to the gems first.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like a game
It's like a game.
to the High Princes.
And it there's the end of spoilers for All Quiet on the Western Front. Watch it if you feel like you can handle a pretty horrifying movie. It's amazing, but the end of the movie is like the commander of like that group that we've been following for the whole movie. The war's like over.
Okay.
And he thinks it'll be like dishonorable to just like surrender, so he sends his troops out for like a final, like knowing they're gonna get massacred, and like every single character we've been following just gets massacred
Cool.
at that point. And it reminded me a lot of this, except Sanderson was somehow able to take. He was like, you know what, we're not gonna do trench warfare. We're gonna think of something as horrifying as trench warfare.
But it's a fantasy theme.
And
It fits in this fantasy world, and it's unbelievably weird, and you could have never conceived of it on your own. Only I could, because I'm Brandon Sanderson.
And it's like as horrifying, I feel like, as trench warfare.
The thing
Like-
that gets me is the entire description of bridge running happens, right? How terrible it is, where he's standing, how he can't see, it rubbing into his shoulders, the fact that he doesn't have shoes.
Yeah, it doesn't
And
have
then
shoes.
they put
doesn't
it
have a
down over
vest.
the first chasm, and he's like, "Okay, are we going back?" And his friend,
Yeah.
the guy who gives him shoes or whatever, gives him shoes, or he takes the shoes after he dies.
I think he
towards the end
takes
of
the
this.
shoes after.
But he's like, "Over? We're not even started yet." And then the next line is like, about a dozen more times of that.
Yep.
So it's that horrible thing that just happened about a dozen more times.
Yep.
And that's the first half of a bridge run. And now you've arrived at the battle,
Which is the worst part.
which is the worst part.
Because
I really quickly want to say we were doing we were observing some website of some fan casting for this book online, and overwhelming majority people fan casted Brandon Sanderson to play the man who dies and Cal takes his shoes. Just I want to put that out there. And because I know Sanderson has said a couple of years ago or last year, this is the year Hollywood came knocking, and we're all hoping that this is like a big, amazing Game of Thrones-esque, not season 8 production. I would love to see Brandon Sanderson as a cameo in a guy who dies after 2 seconds.
Cool. I have my doubts. I think it's just I would love like a TV or movie adaptation, but it's just so dense. I don't know how they would adapt this out of the series.
You have to accept the fact that you're going to need 10 to 20 seasons of television.
Yeah.
And that it's going to cost millions of dollars an episode.
We've had like 45 seasons of Family Guy. We can get 10 seasons.
Seth MacFarlane is over there trying to actually kill himself at this point, so he doesn't have to voice Peter Griffin anymore. Can we get real good media on TV, please? But yeah, that's the thing that we have to get over, is the fact that it's going to cost a disgusting amount of money to make this how it should be made. But if it was done right, it would surpass everything we've ever seen in media so far.
Yeah.
Don't at me.
Exactly. Anyway, yeah, so Cal is being tortured. I feel like I had another thing too. Oh, yeah. There's one point where Kaladin is like considering just giving up and like dying.
Okay.
And then he's like, but then Gaz would win because that's what he wants. he's just running on spite.
Yeah, Kaladin's ability to fuel himself with spite is honestly admirable.
Oh yeah,
I would say.
Oh yeah,
this man gets so far off of spite.
Yep. But so they after dozens of bridge crossings, Gaz calls the order to rotate.
Really quickly, because I'm pretty sure this happens during the bridge run.
Mm-hmm.
Kaladin thinks, and it's like a whole paragraph about Kaladin as a squad leader being like, Gaz risked the mission being what he perceives as this bridge run,
right,
for a slight against me because he didn't like me. And Kaladin's saying that because he wasn't given any gear.
Yeah.
He's bare-chested with the bridge riding against his shoulders. He has no shoes as he's running over the shattered plains. And he's like, this man risked the entirety of this operation to slight me. And that is one of Kaladin's greatest misinterpretations of this entire bit.
Yeah.
Because it has nothing to do with Kaladin. You're not meant to live.
No.
You're supposed to die.
You're supposed to die.
Not just because you're Kaladin. Not because you're Kaladin Stormblessed, Shash-branded Amaram army deserter. Just because you are a bridgeman, your job is to eat arrows and die.
Yep. So from that, we get to the arrival, and they all rotate on Gaz's order. So Kaladin ends up at the front, which at first he's like, oh, I like this better. I can see where I'm running. Mm-hmm. And then he realizes the guy next to him says, oh, this is going to be a bad one. They're already lined up. And Kaladin looks across the chasm that they're about to cross, and the Parshundi are lined up with arrows.
They're lined up with arrows and noticeably short bows.
Yeah.
Yes. It's distinctly mentioned that instead of long bows, which are meant to shoot over ranks and hit the middle of infantry and the lines, it's short bows which are meant to be shot directly at a target. Yep. Short range, and the bridgemen are facing a firing squad.
Yes, and he realizes exactly what's going on,
mm-hmm.
And everyone ends up just dying around him. I think it says he's the only one from this bridge squad to survive.
I don't know if it's that brutal, because I know that someone at the end talks about how because they lost so many people, soldiers will help them carry their bridge.
Oh, he was the only one in the front row.
Yeah, it's something like that. But it's like they lost over half that bridge squad.
But he realized that he got rotated into the front row, and that's why he wasn't given any gear,
mm-hmm.
because Gaz expected him to die, because literally the entire rest of the front row died.
Kind of convenient.
Yeah.
That Kaladin didn't die.
Yeah.
Of all people in that front row.
He's kind of lucky.
Arrows.
He's kind of lucky.
Shooting around him,
Yeah.
Crazy that, he had nothing to do with that. So, yeah, that happens. Gaz is angry, and a bridgeman says it's because you're standing. He expects you to be lying down.
Oh yeah, because Kaladin, his like soldier instincts kick in, and he's like, I can't lie down. It doesn't, no matter how much I want to, because my muscles will cramp up. And
Yeah, he knows lying down's bad, and Gaz doesn't like him because of that.
Right.
Because he's a little smart boy.
Yeah. He keeps calling him like your lordship.
Yeah, I do like that. The relationship. I don't like the relationship between him and Gaz, but like it's funny.
Yeah.
Your lordship stuff, especially when Kaladin ends up getting the better of him. He passes out, and Syl wakes him up. Sylfrena, the wind spirit.
Yeah.
Wakes him up to prevent him from getting left behind. And this is where we get the little, do you have a name, spirit? And she is surprised to remember that she does, and it's Sylfrena. And she's even more surprised to remember that she has a nickname, Syl. Yeah, and that's it. She's surprised. She's like, I guess I have a nickname. That's weird.
Yeah, Cal's kind of just accepted this point. This is a weird wind spread.
Yeah, I think he's got some other things at the top of his plate right now. That the wind spread being a little strange is not one of his greatest priorities.
So I got one thing at the end of this chapter, unless you had anything else.
Nope, I'm done.
Okay, you're done?
Yep.
Cool. So one thing, I don't know if this is in, I'm reading the special edition book. I'm not sure if this is in like the paperback, but at the end of this chapter, there's a bridge of the encampment, or there's a map of the Bridgeman encampment.
I have that too, yeah.
Okay.
It's, because I read this, I just want to mention it. It was written on a large Cremling shell.
Yep.
It was drawn on a large Cremling shell and then annotated by a scholar.
That's what I was going to mention. Is the scholar says, it says that an Alethi scholar defaced it from the perspective of whoever is doing the little annotation at the bottom. It says it was defaced by an Alethi scholar before I could, and that cuts off. What was he trying to do with it?
I don't know. I didn't read that. I don't remember that.
There's a part right at the end. It says it was defaced before I could, and then that's all you can see of the little inscription at the bottom. And I'm like, who? Because why would he care? Because I think that it was defaced because the scholar there's like two different markings on it, and you can kind of see the scholar like wrote down what each place was. They like marked them, because I think you could see that like whoever sketched it originally was just sketching the areas, wasn't labeling anything because it was just for them to use. Mm-hmm. But then the scholar came in and labeled all the areas. And first off, it's like, why is the scholar bothering to like mark up this random shell map that they found? And then more than that, who is doing an annotation on this that's saying it was defaced before I could something? I have no clue who this could be.
That's insanely interesting, because I have no idea.
I've got no clue. My first thought was like, is this wit? Like, is he collecting? Is he like looking at this for some reason? But then it's like, why was the scholar even looking at it?
Right. Like, why did a scholar find a Cremling shell of Sadius's war camp and decide to label it?
And it's a Alethi scholar. So I would imagine that it was found, I don't know, after the war. Because this it raises a lot of questions that I have no clue what the answers are to.
Wow.
There's a lot going on in that little picture at the end of the chapter.
Yeah, hopefully I'll remember. I'll throw it up on the screen for our
for the video
people.
That's a good idea.
But holy crap, yeah, I didn't even read, because like,
that blew my mind.
I skimmed those. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, it's a map. I'm sure I know what this little blurb says about the map. I guess I should pay more attention to those, because damn, that is a deep-seated secret.
My first read of this series I listened to an audiobook. So now that I'm reading it in paper, I want to like, I'm going through and like all of those pictures and figures and stuff, I'm like really going through and reading all of them. Mm-hmm. Like in the previous chapter, there's a really cool like page out of Shallan's notebook of her sketches of the sky eels.
Yeah, I did. I saw that one.
So,
and then it's either book 3 or 4 when the orders become more prevalent. You get nice sketches of every spren in their Shadesmar form, which are really cool.
Yeah, but that was super.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, and my first thought went to wit too, but it just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
So, and then like, yeah, before what? Because even the thing that happens at the end of book 2, the war camps are still prevalent. It's not like they were wiped off the face of the map. Before what? Very interesting.
Like, how important is this specific war camp to whatever history that in the future a scholar is marking up this random map that a soldier scratched into a shell, and then on top of that someone else is commenting on the scholar defacing it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm blowing this up too much. Maybe this was kind of just a cool thing that got thrown in, but I don't know.
It
feels
love to
important.
know what the greater meaning of it is.
It feels really important, and I'm sure there's probably theories out there for what this means. Or maybe it's later in the series and we're dumb and we missed it.
Maybe it hasn't come back yet.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Maybe book 5, this shell will show up again.
Maybe book 5, or like honestly, maybe sometime in the second half, because like maybe 5 through 10 is or 6 through 10 is like a kind of Mistborn era 2 thing.
I think
where,
they're
like,
supposed to
they do like a 200-year jump.
I think there's supposed to be a time, because I think I've seen interviews with Sanderson where he says that he planned this series to be 2 5-book arcs.
Okay.
So I think that this next book that we're getting next year is supposed to be the end of this arc.
Oh my god, so maybe all this stuff that doesn't make any sense, and I know that I'm extrapolating because all this stuff is exactly one thing right now, and it's this map, but maybe there is an event that happens in book 5 into book 6 where like the geography of Roshar as we know it right now becomes way more important.
Yeah.
Because these things aren't as close history as they are currently being the end of book 4 when this is being recorded. Maybe the geography of Sadeas's war camp is up to question and scrutiny far enough in the future and is part of an important enough period of time where they would want to know.
It's not even the whole war camp. It's specifically just the Bridgeman encampment. It only shows basically the Bridgeman barracks, and like there's a sketch of like the wall that they talked about was destroyed, and it's like a very specific area, and I don't know why the specific area, besides it being important to Cal's story.
Right.
I don't know. It's it felt like a very important.
I mean,
thing
it could straight up be it's either one of 3 things: not important, what I said, or it's gonna be like it was Shallan, and it was defaced by someone who made assumptions before she could go and get a first-hand account of it. Kaladin. She found it and was like, man, I wish they didn't do this before I went and double-checked with Cal if this is where all the shit was. It could be something as easy as that.
Yeah.
And like as inconsequential.
I have no clue where it fits in, though. I just thought it was really cool. I was not expecting to go back into this and be like, there's stuff in here that like I have no clue how it fits into the greater story. So that was cool. Anyway, moving on. If you got nothing else in this chapter,
Nothing else.
cool.
We enter another slow chapter.
The first thing I wrote was, I love the Shallan chapters, but this might be the most disappointed I've been to go back to a Shallan chapter.
Because it's just her meeting Capsule.
Yeah.
That's it. She gets into the Palanaeum.
Yep. Which is it's the description of all the books and stuff is like how it describes like her dad had 87 books and that was it, and there's 700,000 books in the Palanaeum.
Even the way that she talks to Capsule about how she learned art, which is based off of a book.
Right.
And she's like, oh, I learned it from this guy. And he's like, you mean the guy who's been dead for a couple hundred years? And she's like, my father had one of his books.
And he's like, oh, you're self-taught? And
yeah.
like
all of that's great. The Palanaeum's great. The Veil's great. The concept of Kharbranth is great. Couldn't care less about Capsule.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm not even gonna say maybe that's hindsight. I didn't really care about Capsule in the first read. I definitely thought he was sus, but I didn't care.
And this chapter is by no means bad. There's parts of this chapter I really like.
Yeah.
But Capsule, like on a reread, I hate reading about Capsule because it's
Capsule on reread is way more obvious, which is annoying because you also have the the reveal.
yeah.
But even knowing I guess it's not even knowing the reveal, because if you didn't see it on the first time, then it's because of the reveal that you're seeing. I don't know. I just think he's very obvious on reread.
Yeah.
But we do learn that Shallan likes jam.
Yeah.
He has a fondness for jam.
Which is important.
Very important. That's probably the most important thing that we get out of this chapter, is that Shallan likes jam.
Well, we do get a glimpse into like Shallan's. I mean, we've seen Shallan sketching and stuff, but this is the first time she sits down and like really works on a picture. And I love the description of. She describes this snipping off like a bit of a plant that can be. That part can be regrown, and that's like how she sees people's like souls that she meets, is she can regrow them on the page. And I thought it was just I love that description.
The way that she talks about her
beautiful.
art is really good.
Yeah.
I guess it's important to note that Capsule's not a typical Ardent. He seems very open to religious discussions and religious interpretations. He's young, he's dreamy, and he's handsome, and a little silly. He almost gets up on the table and does a jig.
Yeah.
And had a bet with another Ardent, which is weird because Ardents don't have any physical possessions. So what did you bet? Oh, we bet the feeling of the sun on our skin and the smell of. He's a weird dude for an Ardent. And then that's all I have for chapter.
Yeah. So there were a couple things in here that I took note of. One was that Shallan mentions that her father forbade her from interacting with the Parchman.
Okay.
On reread, that it's because he knows, right?
Because he's part of the Sons of Honor.
Yeah, he knows. so that's why they just drop that.
Wait, I'm sorry. Is Daddy Devar part of the Sons of Honor? And no, he's part of the Ghost Bloods.
Ghost Bloods, yeah.
And the Ghost Bloods lent him a Soulcaster, or he had the Soulcaster from them. They wanted it back. It's broken. He's dead. That's the problem.
Yes.
It's not that he was with the Sons of Honor and the Ghost Bloods finally caught up with him. He's part of the Ghost Bloods. Okay. So Daddy Devar is part of the Ghost Bloods. Yeah, 100% knows.
Yeah,
he knows about the Parchman.
Which I read that I was just all caps. He knows. I forgot about. I mean, you would never. I feel like I don't know if you caught that on first read. Good for you, because it's like one sentence where Shallan's like, "Oh, my dad never let me interact with the Parchman," and like maybe you pick up on it somehow.
Yeah.
But
I don't know. The Parchman reveal comes as a fucking slap in the face, even when it's revealed.
Yeah, and
so like this far ahead, if you got that, you're a freaking soothsayer.
Yeah. I was like, oh wow, he just threw that in there just to be smart.
Yeah.
Like, is this? I mean, it's really good. I guess it's good. I don't even know if it's good foreshadowing because it's so hard to pick up on.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is good, and we're just dumb. Which is always the possibility.
Okay, maybe it's good as something else. Maybe it's not good foreshadowing, but maybe it's good something. Because, yeah, sure, foreshadowing specifically needs to foreshadow something, and that doesn't do a very... But it does, kind of.
Yeah.
It means that someone who knew things that we don't suspected the Parchman.
Yeah. I think
it is good foreshadowing.
Yeah, but it also feels a little bit like Sanderson just flexing that, like, yeah, I had all this planned out in book 1.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, because, I mean, we don't learn about Shallan's dad until book 2 or 3?
3,
I think. Is when we get all the Shallan flashback.
I think it's 3.
Way later in the series, basically. And, like, I think he might just be like, yeah, I thought about that.
He knew.
The whole thing was that.
But, like, I don't know. I think it's good because I don't read it and go, fucking Sanderson, you bastard. I read it and go, oh, he knew. You know what I mean?
I feel like that was thrown in there specifically for people who wanted to reread it because, like,
That's a good point.
Like, I feel like that'd be so hard to keep track of because it's kind of just a throwaway line as you go through and read. And then later you get the reveal. Here, I feel like, because I mean, even when I was first reading it, I didn't remember that part.
Right.
This one sentence where someone's like, "Oh, I wasn't allowed to interact with the Parchman." so going back and rereading, I was like, oh wow, like
That's
it
pretty early.
was cool. And then the other thing I liked is a picture of a Chull sketched by Shallan at the end of the chapter.
Yeah, I do love
And-
Shallan sketches in this book.
Yeah, which is good for me because I kind of avoided looking up any like art for this because I like whenever I read it, if I listen to a series or something, or if I'm just reading it, like I like to not look up any images or like fan art or anything because I get a very specific picture in my head of stuff, and then I've read all of it. I have those pictures in my head. And I'm like now open to like seeing what other people think of what things look like. I thought Chulls were more like lobster like. And they're just like hermit crabs.
They're like big.
They're big hermit crabs. I thought of them more as like lobsters with antenna and the big claws. And I was like, oh, that's a lobster. Nope.
I kind of thought of them as like big, almost bear shaped, but with like crustacean carapace.
Yeah.
And antenna and big like black.
Or like
crustacean
cow shaped,
eyes.
basically.
Yeah, cow shaped kind of.
But they're just straight up like
big hermit crabs.
big hermit crabs. And personally, I kind of like my interpretation better.
That's why books are so beautiful, man.
It's a cool drawing. I always like seeing Shallan's drawings in here, but yeah, that one I was like,
I could go for mine.
I could go for mine. So I think that's it for chapter 7.
Yeah.
So we're at about an hour now, so I think we can wrap it up. But before we do, I wanted to ask, as I did last episode, did you have a favorite part of what we read in this part and a least favorite part?
I mean, my least favorite part is the conversation with Capsule because it's slow and I'm not interested in Capsule. And I already know what's going on with Capsule. But that's definitely my least favorite.
Buddy, you gotta talk into your mic.
That's definitely my least favorite.
Sorry, everyone's ears. Jack just got really close to his mic.
The best part is probably Kaladin taking the front in the bridge run.
Yeah.
It's when Kaladin hits the front and then up until the end of that chapter. I really like the what's your name spirit. I don't know why, but like I don't know. It feels like calling her spirit feels like he holds it with her existence with reverence. And then he's like, "Oh, she's like kind of intelligent and conscious. Maybe I should like ask her name." That's probably my favorite part is him asking Syl's name. How about you?
I think my least favorite part is probably that line from Kaladin that I talked about earlier.
Lucky.
Where
lucky.
yeah, he says the woman buying the slaves is like slaves with that brand are usually just executed where I'm from, and he's like they're fortunate. I'm like, we've gotten so much description of Kaladin's like self-loathing and like we get it. Like we didn't need another like spoken like.
You'll get more though.
I know you get so much more, but I mean the rest of it is like internal. It's not like him.
Yeah, that one
complaining.
That one's a
to
little
people.
cringe, but
like I feel like later Kaladin doesn't really let his self-loathing like he doesn't complain about it to other people, which I think is a really interesting aspect of his character. He just seethes.
Yeah,
and like this was like it's weird that he's like.
It's almost
he's
like
whining about it.
It's almost like we haven't found Kaladin yet.
Yeah,
it's like Kaladin's still trying to like come into his character as a character in the book, not even as Kaladin. You know what I mean?
I even think in this book, like I don't know how much he like. I think maybe in this book he does do a little bit more whining, like to other people.
We'll have to see as we keep going through it.
I just know later in the series it's much more internal, which I think is a lot more interesting because it's him having to deal with the feelings on his own.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
So that part was like a little, like, what are we doing? And then my favorite part, I already said my favorite part. My favorite part is Yasna asking Shallan, how would you go about calculating the mass? And she says, I would ask one of the scribes because I'm like, that's such a good answer.
Okay, yeah, that is a really good.
And
part.
it sets up the vibe of like the engineering with the magic system and the rest of the series. That is like.
Yeah,
my favorite part. So cool.
Very good.
Well, thanks again to everyone, however many everyone is at this point, for joining us for another episode of Couchpact.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
See you in episode 3, fellas.
Adios.